Hey there, welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Abhi Sharma, a teacher and tutor at LSAT Demon. I'm joined by my colleague, Damon Alvarez, the Demon's Veteran Liaison, and our super special guest today, Jasper Burns, a JD MBA student at Stanford and a Knight Hennessy Scholar. He's also an 8-year Navy vet and a representative from Service to School. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining me today. I do want to take a second to introduce Damon, your podcast debut for the Demon. So welcome to the team. You want to take a second to introduce yourself, Damon?
Absolutely. Thanks, Abhi. My name is Damon Alvarez. I am the Veterans Liaison Coordinator as well as a Pre-Law Outreach Coordinator here at the Demon. Super stoked to be here and excited to talk to you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, really happy to have you on the team. And we have Jasper here today because Damon reached out to Service to School and initiated this partnership. So speaking of you, Jasper, could you talk a little bit about maybe your military background and how you kind of found out about Service to School or LSAT Demon, because you were also a Demon student back in the day, if you don't mind?
Yes, of course, and thanks for having me. So, my military background starts back in college. I was a ROTC cadet or student, really, at the Naval ROTC at Boston University. I joined that sophomore year. I joined after the Boston bombing, my freshman year actually, and then got the scholarship and spent 3 years at Naval ROTC. I was able to commission as an officer into flight school as a naval flight officer. Spent 2 years down in Pensacola, Florida, earning my wings. Moved over to Whidbey Island to fly E-18G Growlers, a variant of the F-18 jet fighter. Then did 2 years in DC before kind of leaving the military and joining the higher educational institutions over at Stanford.
That's very cool. How'd you find out about the Demon?
Yeah, so all right, so yeah, talking about some LSAT stuff. I started, I was actually studying, this might be something that's familiar to other military vets. A lot of the spaces we work in are classified, and so when I started studying for the LSAT, I was starting with a lot of these LSAT books that I had found, and on my lunch breaks or just in some free time when I was in a skiff, I was able to kind of pull that out and do a lot of this written work, and I found it rather slow. And by the time when I was working at home, I did some research online. I looked at LSAT Demon, some of your competitors. I tried a couple of them, thought the Demon was the best, and basically spent many months, 6+ months on LSAT Demon, grinding through LSAT questions and getting the kind of the live feedback that you guys offer, and certainly improved my score to be good enough for Stanford. So it's been a great product. Yeah.
Jasper, would you mind sharing with us what you actually scored, where you started and where you ended up at the end of the process?
Oh, that's a good question.
Okay, so yeah, so I took a diagnostic score. This was almost a year-long journey. My diagnostic was a 165, and then
That's a pretty damn good diagnostic score.
It was, but it took me almost a year to get my goal score, even with that diagnostic. And yeah, so I started with the diagnostic 165. My first LSAT on record, I think I had been scoring in the 173-ish range for my previous practice test, and I get a 168 on the first one, right? I take it again.
Feels bad.
Yeah. And I take it again. I get a 172. So I'm getting closer, but my GPA was below the 25th percentile at these top schools, which I think is probably common for a lot of veterans. And so I was like, to me, this was like a no-fail mission. I wanted above 75th percentile on the LSAT. That might not always be necessary, especially for veterans with good experience, but that's how I kind of viewed the problem, and just kept retaking it till I got a 176 on record.
Nice. No, I was very much in the same boat, Jasper. I was looking at my 3.5 GPA, my engineering GPA, which I was proud of. Back in the day, I worked my ass off for that. But yeah, a 3.5 is below the 25th for every T20 school. And so I think no fail is really an apt way to put it. And again, I want to emphasize that what's really nice about using percentiles, like the 75th and 25th, is that those scale to whatever schools are on people's goal lists, right? Mm. So if you want to go to the best school in your city, in your hometown, you should still be thinking about, okay, am I below the 25th, or am I at the median, or how can I make myself a better candidate? Being above the 75th or being above the median at least on the LSAT score for the school you want to go to, that's a great target because it makes you stand out. It makes you look like a really good applicant. So that's great advice.
The only thing I'll say is, again, just, transparency. I am a service to school mentor, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm not, I don't have experience on admissions committees. So most of this is a little bit of vibe work, but my vibes from being, at law school, talking to Dean Deal over at Stanford is a lot of these numbers they're not how you get into law school. It's kind of, some level of like metric proficiency is required as like table stakes, but it's not how you actually kind of get over the line. So I don't think it's required to have above 75th and below 25th. I mean, median means half the class is below it, right? So sometimes people lock in on the numbers. I think for veterans especially who have normally a lot more life experience and a lot more interesting experiences, we tend to be able to outperform. So I think the numbers are, for me, like no fail mission. I'm going to get as many, what we would say in the military, are my order of battle as strong as possible, and like the numbers are part of your order of battle, like the assets that are behind you as you try to accomplish a goal. But I don't want people to think that's the only way to get through.
Jasper, so you mentioned service to schools and the fact that you're a mentor. Can you just go ahead and speak a little bit about the program and how you serve the service to schools?
Sure. So yes, Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit. It helps veterans navigate admissions generally. Their primary, we're primarily founded for undergraduates or for enlisted to go to the undergrad schools, but they also have JD and MBA kind of modules for mentors like me to help, once we've got into law school, to then help current veterans who are applying. And there are a lot of types of organizations that offer admissions consulting, which is generally thousands and thousands of dollars. And this is a way for veterans to take on, another vet who might be similarly positioned and help them work through their narrative, work through their story, work through the application process, including, the various minutiae of, LSAC and maybe talking through interview prep and the rest of it. So, yes, it's a great way for any veteran to just get another person's eyes that's not their friend, not their family, another vet who will shoot it honestly with them and be blunt about what's working and what's not. So,
yeah, that was my biggest experience too, or the biggest win I got from being a person who participated in service to school. My mentor was somebody with a veteran background, and they kind of understood what I was even trying to communicate with my personal statement, right? So they can kind of shape your shot group a little bit because they know the context of your career, they know the context of the things that you're trying to communicate, and that can help you communicate those things more effectively. So, Jasper, it's pretty vibes based, right? None of us are official adcoms at anywhere, right? But like sometimes you need somebody who actually understands what vibe you're trying to put off, and it helps you kind of shape that communication.
Yeah, totally. And again, like would never put a informal veteran mentor at the same level as someone who's really done this professionally. But it is something when you find veterans who have been able to get into like many or multiple schools. That's a like multiple hypothesis test that they know how to tell a story, and so it certainly is. Certainly is value and certainly is worth the money of $0 to get a friend and a mentor helping people with your app. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Damon, have you already started using service to school?
No, so because I'm still studying for my LSAT, they require your resume writing done and also the personal statement. So I haven't done the personal statement yet. And as soon as I do that, I'll be applying to be a mentee. But yeah, right now, no.
That's another thing I like is they won't, and this, props to service to school. You can't just kind of send an email and go, help me. Right? You need to have written something. You need a draft resume. You need a draft personal statement because then your mentor actually has something to work with, which I think makes the help more substantive. So I like that policy.
It's also good to have an LSAT, like to have multiple practice LSATs and know your LSAT range because it'll help us with mentor pairing as well. There's a couple pieces of homework you got to bring in to make sure that we do good mentor pairing and we're able to help vets the best they can. But
it's for the vet's benefit. I promise.
Yes.
We're not just being mean. It's for our own good. It helps us get better advice.
Sure. To clarify, there is sorry, Abhi, but there's a floor, right, that you're looking for in terms of LSAT score typically. I think 153 might be the minimum that they're trying to shoot for, or
Yeah, I'm actually not sure what serves the
okay.
schools like at bottom minimum. I mean, our goal is to help, just to help, and we may have some limits in terms of what we think is reasonable for some vets, but that's not something I'm familiar with.
Okay. Yeah.
Very cool.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, were you a mentee as well for service to
Yes.
school?
So yeah, I can talk about some of this, the process, or what was kind of valuable for me going through it, and then what I've tried to bring to my mentees now. So yeah, I found service to school. I'm not sure if it was word of mouth or just via the internet or part of the transition process that we go through called TAPS. But anyway, I had heard about the program, signed up. I got paired with a mentee, or correction, a mentor over at Harvard, and I might be a non-standard military person where I'd been writing for a couple years for fun, for my own personal edification. So I hadn't even run out of practice writing. Nonetheless, when I gave my personal statement to my mentor, it was really, really great reframing, where it came back completely full of red ink and was basically like, this is bad, right? And that was great, and it was a immediate mind shift for me while I was sitting there reading the comments, oh, okay, I need to completely change how I approach this. And I do this. I've had about 15-ish mentees since. I'm one of the more active mentors on the service to school program, and almost, I'd say, three-quarters of my mentees, the first personal statement draft that I receive is not generally not close to where we want it to be. And it's actually very fun for me to be able to share the same experience that I received, and give fairly harsh critique and feedback via email. I try to be kind, but also, hey, Abhi, hey, Damon, this is not going to cut it for your goal schools, and we need to, go back to the drawing board, both on, maybe the story we're telling, and maybe on the content, and as well as on the grammar, the writing style, and a number of items. And so that's something I definitely try to bring to my mentees is, hey, you need a mental reframe. You might have spent 5 hours on this. It's not even close. For some people, I have certainly had plenty of good essays come across my desk as well. But
that was 100% my experience, Jasper. The first personal statement draft that turned into my mentor, she was like, hey, and again, she was trying to be kind. She essentially told me it sucked. And it did. In hindsight, man, it was so bad. And I think the best, it was full of red ink, and the writing could have been tighter. But I think the biggest piece of feedback I got, the most helpful piece of feedback I got from her, she said, this story isn't about you. And I think that's something that a lot of vets struggle with. We write in the plural a lot. We write about our team. We write about our unit. We write about our mission. It's we. It's never I. And she read my personal statement. She said, this personal statement is not about you, Abhi. It's about all of the people in your story. And that was really, really important for me to hear, especially from somebody who got it, because it helped me reframe my personal statement to suck a lot less, I think, to put it bluntly.
So if we're talking about some personal statement stuff, there's other things I'd like to anchor on here. If I'm giving general advice, I mean, this might be for everyone, but to vets specifically, one problem that vets often have, and I don't know if it's because we're jaded from years of working in government or whatever else, but something that is frequently missing from the essays that I've reviewed is self-awareness of of emotion. There's often a lack of emotional writing coming from veterans. It's we did this, or I did this, XYZ happened, but not discussing how whatever this event was really weighed upon me, and I could feel my heart race, and it made me realize I needed to reshape what my priorities in life were, and that's evidenced by XYZ that I've done, and that's how you can kind of mix the subjective with the objective. So I think that's something that I've only been doing or almost only been doing service to school editing, but that's something. I don't know, maybe that's a universal trait, but certainly, at least with the veterans I've consulted with, bringing emotion into your writing is super important for these applications.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the writing that we do in the military, you think of point papers, how often, you get red pen for being like not concise while you're writing something and then removing certain things. Like it's very straight and to the point. I would say, like, especially after 8 years of service in the military, you're funneled into a very specific type of writing. So I'm sure that definitely translates well to have that support through services schools. And I know Abhi and I were talking. Another thing that I kind of wanted you to touch on, if you're willing, is translation into the civilian world and language. Because even across the branches, we have different words for things. There's different ways that we address different topics. And sometimes I know veterans have a hard time, especially when they're transitioning, translating that into something that a civilian admissions counselor is going to understand.
Sure. So my philosophy on this is your essays, your resume, all of the pieces of paper that you're putting in for these applications. I mean, you are trying to translate your meaning and your experience to another person's brain, their meaning and their experience. And if they can't understand, if the person receiving cannot understand what you're saying, then they're not going to get the message. So, my bias is towards like extreme clarity on this type of stuff. So, for example, um, maybe an admissions officer is familiar with the term like a commanding officer. They'll just imagine the commander of some sort of unit.
Right.
But maybe like executive officer is a more nebulous term, something that we're very used to dealing with. I wouldn't have a problem, if you're writing this on a resume, you're saying like, Damon acted as an executive officer of XYZ. I would just put parentheses like IE, comma, chief of staff, right? Something that's just giving a civilian analog to the military words. And I'm like very, very, willing to do that wherever I can. So for example, looking again at like a resume example, I had a bunch of squadrons that I was a part of when I was an aviator, right? VAQ 136, VAQ 129, Electronic Attack Squadron, like whatever. All of that is very opaque to admissions officer, and so I literally just wrote multiple fighter jet squadrons parentheses, and I would put like the squadron names if they cared, but I think we should the bias towards over translation.
Right.
If you were a department head, maybe you could put like in parentheses, i.e., director level, etc. And so I'm sure we can use online tools, ChatGPT, any of these types of systems to try and find translations, but then just be willing to, you can just use those in your resume, in your essays, if you can make it flow naturally, etc.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, so I think the takeaway here is this is good advice whether you're thinking about an essay or a resume or anything where you're describing what you did in the military. That's great advice from Jasper, right? You're trying to kind of transfer your experience into the other brain. So you need to use words that people understand, folks. You got to use words that people understand. There's no way around it.
One more related bit to this is things like awards that you may have received, and this can apply in the military, but can also apply to just like some college award you won. Oftentimes, I see people put like won the XYZ award, and that's like, and then comma, and
without
then
explaining.
And then their next award, comma, and if there's no context about if this was an important or special thing. So I'd put like won the XYZ award, parentheses, like i.e. number 1 out of 400 for whatever type of impact that is being calculated here. Just some way to just show, like, translate what these things are, especially if it's a a named award, the Damon Alvarez Award or something. Like, what does that mean? Right. I need that spelled out as someone, because I imagine these officers are running through these applications fairly quickly. They're not going to just, well, they could Google it, I suppose, but I wouldn't trust that they would. So I would share it in as much clarity as you can. And it's frustrating because it does take up space on like a limited sized resume, but I'd rather translate my 3 best awards so they understand what they are, rather than my like 10 and have them not know what any of them are. So
that's a really good point. Yes, people worried about space, whether that's in your personal statement or on your resume, people worried about space. That's such good advice. You need them to understand what your best accomplishments were. It's not worth it to have more shit on the page if none of it is intelligible. So I love that. I'm going to start telling that to my students too. That's really great advice. So we've kind of been giving generic advice so far. Let's take a second, zoom out, and go, okay, here we have somebody with a bunch of years of experience as a mentor from service to school. My question is, can you walk us through the application from top to bottom, start to finish, and just give us your big hits on everything?
Sure, absolutely. So let's see. An application mostly consists of your numbers, aka your GPA and LSAT, your resume, your various written statements, your letters of rec, and the addenda, and then interviews as well. So if we can probably breeze through some of these fairly quickly, but starting with numbers, GPA. GPA is often where veterans underperform. We mentioned this. And that's, I think, okay because we're going to try and make up some of that with our more interesting life experience. And then depending on how disastrous your GPA might have been in undergrad, which for some veterans it certainly was, and for me again under 25th percentile, then that's where we want to make up some of the gap in order to meet the table stakes with the LSAT. Obviously most of the listeners here are probably very familiar with a lot of the LSAT advice coming through the regular podcast, so we probably don't need to belabor the numbers too much.
Well, and I think it's worth pointing out that we agree with service to school, and service to school agrees with us here, right? The numbers are important. They are the table stakes. This is what every, I think, sane person giving advice about law school admissions, they need to agree. So if you're listening to somebody and they don't agree with that, I would caution you to continue listening.
Yeah, and so maybe a couple other things to say on the LSAT that sometimes get missed or misunderstood by people who may not be as well versed or haven't listened to your podcast before. A couple big warnings. One, do not take an official LSAT until your practice tests reflect the score that you would want to have for your goal schools. So that might be one thing to be aware of. And then two is the LSAC's score preview service, and the ability to cancel a score is well worth the money. So just buy it and talk to your service to school mentor before you decide to cancel a score. But just have that conversation, and having that optionality is certainly valuable. So those might be the two things to mention on LSAT before we kind of move forward.
We may slightly disagree on that as Demon team members. Okay. I think we would question why you should pay an extra, I think it's like $75 for the option to cancel a score, because if you were waiting to sign up for the test until your PTs were close to where you wanted, ideally you're not even in that situation. But yeah,
I mean, so yes, and when you're playing these games with schools, especially if you try to do scholarship negotiations, like the order of magnitude of the dollars that you're playing with are 5 and 6 figures, and so $75 to have a better looking application, which if there's even on the margins, if it helps you at all on the margins, might help with a much bigger kind of dollar negotiations. To me, the $75 is worth it. And you will also be saving, as a veteran, often be saving a lot of money on fee waivers for a number of these schools anyway. So maybe just consider that a transfer of
that's true.
of goods there.
Another thing that I think that veterans don't often consider when it comes to LSAT score and negotiations with scholarships is you can actually turn some scholarships into stipends if you already are receiving the GI Bill with some yellow ribbon benefits. So, if you get your LSAT up to a high enough score, you go to the table, then you may be walking away with more money than you even first considered.
Sure. Cool. So maybe if we then move on to the resume, again, we've hit some points here. I'll just kind of add a couple additional ones. First is sometimes veterans question if they should be using their rank on their resume. As long as you're active duty, you're still able to use your rank. I wouldn't do it if you had already left, but I think most people are applying while they're still active duty. I would say use your rank, right? The veteran is a special part of your identity and your application. So I would put, for me, I was a lieutenant in the Navy, Lieutenant Jasper Burns at the top of the resume, or LT is probably fine as well. We've already spoken to spelling out mil-speak for civilians, so I won't belabor that, but I have liberal use of parentheses in order to try and explain items. A couple bits which aren't necessarily military specific, but maybe just resume advice writ large. Sometimes I see hyphens or M dashes even when an N dash is more appropriate for dates, and there's a lot of grammatical things that are worth really running through just because it looks extremely professional. And I don't think an admissions committee is going to care if you're using a hyphen instead of an end dash. But if you do it right, it's just all the more impressive that you're well versed in your grammar and the rest of it. Then one option you have, this is hard to show, or speak about rather than show visually, but if you've worked in both the military and outside the military, and those both show up in your experience line in the resume, one option you might think about doing, this is purely technique, this is not like a requirement by any measure, but something to consider, is you could have like a full left aligned experience lines for each of your main jobs. But you may have worked at XYZ corporate institution, that's full left aligned, and you may have worked at United States Navy. And then you could actually indent, if you wanted, you could do a partial indent for all of your subcommands, if that's a way you wanted to organize your resume, because you're basically working at multiple sub-organizations of a larger one. That's something that, as people are trying to figure out how they want their resume to look, that's an option to think about, which is, again, just just doing small indents for sub-organizations under, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army, etc. So that's kind of one thing I sometimes show to my mentees. Again, totally technique. It's not going to really change your admissions. It just makes your resume look organized. And then maybe the last bit on the resume for the moment is often bullets are, the actual bullets you're writing are not impact oriented. So I really think it's good to have like verb, like did X to achieve Y, quantifiable impact. Often military is given a lot of responsibility early, and so you'll be responsible for $100 million of equipment or something, but that doesn't mean you could be responsible for that and be absolutely mismanage that responsibility. Right. So I think it's really important to be able to say, what did you actually do to achieve what impact? And if you can quantify that, that's amazing, right? If you were ranked number 1 or number 2 out of X number of people in your ranking group, amazing. If you were able to deploy with 30% higher maintenance rate because you were able to do some sort of maintenance improvement, like cool. Can we quantify that? And if you don't have those numbers off the top of your head, like actually look for them. A lot of times people say, I don't have that, I'm not going to bother. But I mean, if you can send an email to someone and say, hey, like, do we have our historical rate, and what it was under me, and I know it got better, but I don't know exactly how much. Just being able to quantify impact is going to show that you actually did something rather than we're just responsible for something.
And if you're struggling, folks, to figure out how to phrase what you did and why it mattered, that might be a moment to reconsider that bullet, right? If you can't actually tell us why that bullet matters and quantify it, you might actually need to look for something else.
Yeah, and then this is again a technique item. I know there might be grammatically correct ways to not use numbers under 10 but spell out numbers above 10 or something, or to use numerals above 10, or whatever style guide you're using. I tend to like to just use numerals because even if it violates a style guide, just because I think people's eyeballs just pinpoint on numbers. So if you have good numbers, if you have a 4.0 GPA, just write 4.0, and with numerals, because I think people's eyes will just be drawn to these numbers. If you managed 100 million equipment, or even if it's just 1 million equipment, I'm okay putting a 1 because it will draw people's eyes to that numeral, and emphasize that if that's a piece worth emphasizing.
Yeah, that's great advice. And just make sure you're consistent. I would also add to that, right? So just pick whatever makes sense for you and stick to it. But I do like seeing numbers on a resume. It's easier to read.
And then, one more piece, because I've done so many mentees at this point. Sometimes it's just interesting to see where kind of different advice comes from for different people, because people have different deficits. One thing that I've found to be, I think this would be useful, is when you're writing your interest line, if you have a miscellaneous section, I think it's better to be more specific than less specific. So if you if you write powerlifting, it might be better to say competitive powerlifting or something. If you like skiing, but you're really a cross-country skier, then write cross-country skiing, because the more specific one probably shows a little bit more passion or interest, that you have a little bit more of a niche. But also, if the admissions, if it is a niche topic and admissions committee officer is like, oh, I also do this kind of niche thing, I also read this specific type of book, or I also, have this specific hobby, I think having a little bit extra adjectives or description of exactly what you do rather than just fitness or something is just a lot better. It makes you look more complex, maybe, than very general and generic interests.
Awesome. What advice would you give to a prospective law school applicant who is on the fence about whether they even want to go to law school?
Okay, so yeah, taking a step back from the application components for a moment for the decision to go to law school to begin with. I mean, it's something I think veterans are really well suited for because I think one of my, or at least I can speak for myself at minimum, one of the, I think the big values of a law degree is the ability to work in both private and public sectors, right? Over a career. And this is something that many lawyers do, where they go work in big law, they become an AUSA, maybe they go into political appointment, and they go back to big law, maybe they even leave the law entirely. They do other sort of corporate jobs or JD Advantage jobs with the benefit of legal knowledge. So I think the fact that we have a history in public service, one is a good, this like civic mindset is good for us as we look to apply to a job that has a significant amount of civic overlap. And I think it is also nice because a lot of veterans are used to kind of working for a higher purpose, towards a national level goal. And it is not uncommon for veterans to then join the corporate world and find that their life is not quite as meaningful as they had once thought. And so the ability and the freedom to then kind of, make the sacrifice on money, but go back towards public service if that's something that, was very meaningful for you. That is a nice option to have. That it can be harder with some other degrees, but it's certainly afforded by a law degree.
Yeah, and I tend to find that veterans who are on the fence, I think sometimes are a little bit insecure about their ability to, for instance, do well on the LSAT or
Right.
to like really lock in and write a good personal statement. So I think, Jasper, you might agree with this. Like, those should not be the reasons you don't try. You can get this stuff together. You can get your application together. Whether you want to go to law school and actually practice law, that's a different question that you have to answer yourself. But as Jasper's kind of laying out, like there's kind of a formula to the application that if you follow it and you try your best and you improve your writing, you write a better resume, you get a good LSAT score, this is something that you can accomplish. You are not counted. You shouldn't count yourself out just because you might feel like it's not for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we tend to outperform generally based off of our history of experience. And so I always say apply broadly. One for admissions, two for scholarship negotiation. Apply broadly. We have fee waivers, which is for a lot of the schools, not all schools, but a lot of the schools. So it's even easier. The best thing about law school admissions compared to, for example, business school admissions is that the letters of rec are reusable, so you don't have to bother, the people you care about to just write 100 letters of rec. So the only limitation is your desire to write more essays or optional essays, and you can do that. Like you can churn these out. Once you have a 95% solution, you can make the small edits that you need on these couple essays to turn out 10 applications in a weekend if you're willing to put that
Right.
effort. And you've stood watch till 3 a.m. before 5 a.m. You can do a nice long weekend and get more apps in and open your kind of aperture of possibilities.
So to get us back on track, I think we had hit numbers, we had hit the resume pretty thoroughly. Speaking of writing, what's your tip for veterans improving their writing and making sure their essays actually communicate the best they can?
Sure. So, there's a number of essays we write, the personal statement, the kind of what was once a diversity, now it's sometimes a perspective statement, or, any number of optional statements. And I think there's a couple things to think about here. Maybe the first, structurally or holistically, is I really like to think about having all of your essays illuminate different facets of the same entity. So I'm going to use a metaphor here, so bear with me if it doesn't make sense. Please let me know. But if you can imagine like a statue in the middle of a dark room, okay, and your personal statement might be like a front-on flashlight, and you get to see this kind of front profile of what this object is in the middle of the room, and then your other essays may be different angles on this like uniform archetype that you're wishing to present. And so what I often see when you talking about the holistic like use of all your essays together is sometimes people's stories are really disjunct. Like their personal statement goes down one angle, and then their other essays, secondary essays, kind of make it look like a completely different person. I think it's important to be a different facet of the same person. So making sure that you have like a unity of I really like to talk in archetypes. Like if you can imagine, they're not going to remember your name, or my name Jasper, your name Damon or Abhi. They're going to remember a couple words about who you were. Like for me, maybe it was like fighter jet Navy guy or something, right? Who likes to write or something, like who's got some like intellectual interest or whatever, right? Just they're not going to remember your name, but they will remember who you are, like what kind of archetype you fill and what archetype you fill for their class, right? Because they're looking to build a class of people, some who are going to be intellectual property lawyers, some are going to be appellate lawyers, going to be any number of different things, and they don't want 200 appellate lawyers, right? And so you're going to sort of fit into some niche for them, and so I think it's important to be able to write your essays so they paint you in a specific niche, right? And the smaller you can niche yourself, the smaller your competitive pool, right? So being a veteran is one thing, but being a veteran who also does X and also does Y makes your competitive pool even smaller, as long as you can keep that as a coherent narrative and not like a disjoint story. So that's like one structural thing I would say on how to plan your essays. And by the way, plan your letters of rec. Like they should be another illumination on that same statue in a dark room. And so I think it's also worth telling your recommenders, like, hey, you're going to write this recommendation, but could you tell these 2 or 3 stories, because they help create this holistic image of who I'm trying to present myself to be. Okay, so that's like strategy level stuff. On the more specific level stuff, I've already mentioned writing with emotion is really important. And something that even after I've already made these critiques, sometimes vets still don't, like, it takes a couple swings at bat for them to really understand and lean into why their story is important rather than just existed, right? And these types of things are important to you, and why law is like a subjective decision. And that's kind of what the personal statement is for. And I need to understand why you emotionally want to do this, not just that it might make financial sense or something, or because you didn't know what to do when you left the military. So really, really try to hone in on the feelings you have as well. And then additionally, a lot of vets don't have. I actually had a lot of experience writing, but I still wasn't a good writer, it turns out, until I did a little bit more research. So again, I treated this as a no-fail mission. So I read like 3 or 4 books on writing. Like I was like, to me, the writing is an important part of this application, and I'm literally going to read, The Elements of Style, and a couple other books on writing in order to actively spend time becoming a better writer, because 1, it's important for the applications, but 2, it's important for your legal career. So I would recommend for the people who really want to get into a reach school for them is, well, do the work, right? And become a better writer actively, rather than just waiting for a mentor to kind of write a critique. Some examples of what this might look like are, one I like to point out is like consistent metaphor. So if you're saying, this laid a foundation for my next adventure, then the next verb you might use would be, and this built on top of a foundation, because these are consistent. If you're weaving a tapestry, then there might be something that sewn throughout your life or whatever, right? Like, so keeping consistent metaphor is like an interesting example of high level writing, which people often neglect, and they haven't really thought about like verb choice, right? They'll just look at a list of synonyms and pick one that sounds smart or something. But I think it's much better to have kind of a deliberate sense of like a poetic sense almost of what you're trying to write, because this is a writing profession. I'll stop there, and I can keep going here in a minute. But
well, and we're trying to be professional writers, right? Yeah. I mean, that's a really, really big point there at the end. If anybody's like, this sounds boring, why would I read The Elements of Style? Well, sure. I mean, The Elements of Style, it's a guidebook, but you're applying to be a lawyer. Like, you want to be a lawyer. You're going to write for a living. So this might be something you should be interested in, at least academically.
Yeah, and so a couple final points I'll say on the writing, and we can move to the next one. But well, one, since we're mentioning the books, I'll say on the Elements of Style was great, as well as On Writing Well, which is so Elements of Style by William Strunk Jr., On Writing Well by William Zinsser, and then I also read Dreyer's English by Benjamin Dreyer, and those might be three books for a place to start if people are interested. And then maybe some last little writing tips here. I talked about consistent metaphors. I talked about emotion. Another thing would be, so this is something that happens a lot when you're in law school, writing, doing legal research and writing, is signals. Like it's very good to, at the start of paragraphs, signal where your reader is. So if you're now in high school, say, and then in high school or something that's a, maybe better phrase than that, but you know, first, second, third are like good ways to structure this in people's minds so they know where they are. Um, so there's a lot of ways to use signaling and writing, so that's something to think about. And the last is also telling this narrative arc. One of the ways I've heard an admissions officer put this before is they'd like to see distance traveled. And so one way to think about your writing is in terms of pivot points, because the more, like, the number of pivots you've made helps explain like the road that you've walked down. And so for a lot of veterans, there's going to be a reason they joined the military, right? So maybe there's a pivot, there's your pre-military life, there's a pivot point, and then there's your military life. Um, and then there's going to be a pivot about why you left, right? So that's already two pivots and three parts of a road that you've traveled, and there might be another one or two in there about why you changed a certain job or why you went somewhere else. And so I think being able to discuss your distance traveled and your pivot points is pretty useful. And then just as a matter of, again, like writing structure, it's often useful to start with a hook, right? And start with like a first strong sentence that really draws your reader in. And that might not be at the start of your story. So I think it's often okay you don't want to jump around in time too much, but if you want to start with a 2, 3, 4 sentence intro paragraph with like the most interesting part of your story, like get the reader interested, start with impressive language, and then you can kind of zoom out, tell the story in order. That's like another technique that might be useful for people. So
Awesome. Thinking about when you were mentioning the fact that some veterans tend to, maybe downplay their potential ability to get into law school. Have you noticed that with any of your mentees, and do they typically tend to be, enlisted or officers, or what's your experience been with the pool without getting into too much detail?
yeah, so I mean, just by virtue of the JD being an advanced degree, all of the applicants have at least an undergraduate degree, which means on balance it tends to be more officers. I know the admissions committees are definitely looking for enlisted, and they do often or very often know the difference. So I really think enlisted service members should not discount their experiences either, because it's really important and underrepresented, and these are things that I think the admissions committees are really really interested in. Sometimes I do see service members count themselves out. Often service members can be very ambitious and they want top schools that are maybe out of reach based off of their current numbers, and that's why they sign up for services like LSAT Demon to get your number, your metrics a little higher. Um, but yeah, often, just as often, service members are not maybe reaching high enough. They may only think about their local schools, especially because a lot of veterans come from tight families in certain parts of the country, and that's where they want to raise a family. I think it's really important that those school choice decisions are made after you have options on the table, and that you've applied very broadly. And the law is it's unfortunate, but it's a very prestige focused field. And if you had the opportunity to go to schools, certain like higher ranked schools, it may open genuinely different opportunities that shape the whole trajectory of your career. So I think people sometimes like to pretend like that's not the case, out of a sense of egalitarianism, but that's not. It's really not how it works, and that's at least my view from the people I've chatted with in a number of organizations, both public and private. Um, and so I think don't count yourself out. Apply as broadly as possible. If it's got a fee waiver, why not apply for it? Even if it doesn't, the extra couple bucks is going to well be worth it if one of these gambles, it hits. And because this is shaping your next 40 years potentially, right, of a career. So this is where the investment should be made. in both time as well as in money on these applications.
That's that's such a good point, and I just keep thinking about the statue metaphor that you were telling us, because that is such a good way to think about your application as a whole. Honestly, more than just a law school application, that's a good branding, like a self-branding exercise, right? Like that's how all of us should be going through life, at least as professionals, right? We are more than our professional accomplishments. We are family members and spouses and partners too. That matters. Humanity matters. But at least as professionals, man, I mean, I'm going to steal that forever. As professionals, we need to constantly be thinking of ourselves as different angles of the same entity. And yeah, I mean, part of that even is veterans have a space in grad school. You can be an academic person even though you we're in the veteran community or we're in the military community, or not, right? It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But just such a good branding exercise. I think when we put the uniform on, part of the point is you kind of lose the angles. Everybody's hair is in regs and you wear the same shit to work every day. Part of the point of that is that we reduce the number of angles to make us a little bit less interesting, because our goal is to succeed as a unit. But I think part of the hanging the OCPs up, so to speak, is kind of rediscovering all of the things that make us interesting and then being able to communicate them in a meaningful way. I love that metaphor. I'm stealing that forever. Did we hit the whole application, Jasper? I feel like we hit the numbers, we hit the resume, we hit the personal statement and other essays, and we slightly touched on letters of rec.
Yeah, maybe we'll just kind of finish a little bit more on letters of rec, which is, I think veterans this is an area of strength for veterans, because the people who tend to write our letters of rec, we may have deployed with, we may have even lived with, but, they tend to be, you do want a rank higher than you, right? Like, you're not having your peers write these, but a couple things to think about here. People are often skeptical about this. About like the rank distinction. Like, oh, should I choose my, admiral, general, or in the Navy, an 06 captain, or should I choose my department head who's an 04, or maybe, a commanding officer who's an 05, or something along these lines. And everyone always says it. People still question it, but it's the truth. Pick the people who will say the best things about you, no matter their rank. And that is almost always your direct supervisor, right? Or your. So for me, like, I had a couple letters of rec. I had one from my direct supervisor. I had one from my commanding officer, who is my supervisor's supervisor. And then I had an academic letter of rec as well that I was able to scrounge despite being 8 years out. So a couple things to think about. Veterans tend to be older, and they tend to be farther from undergrad, and they tend to not have academic letters of rec on file. And the farther out you get, the more that's okay. But I would really tell any veteran who has some sort of connection to one of their former professors to really try their best to get an academic letter of rec, because I do know a lot of schools do care about that. So I think it's very easy to say, I haven't talked to them in 3 years or something, I'm not going to bother them, but it's at least reach out, at least see if they will help you write a full-on a supportive letter. And if not, that's okay. You can make do with 2 professional letters. But that's the first thing there. The second one I mentioned earlier, but I think it's really important, is to guide your letters of rec writers for the kind of same statue metaphor I used before, which is you're telling a kind of a holistic story about yourself, and they are part of that story. So it should, what they're talking about, they're not going to repeat your personal statement, right? And they should not. They shouldn't be telling the same stories. They should be telling different stories that show the same kind of archetype of person that you're trying to be. And that, they should be telling how you're professionally successful. If you can't get academic letters, but, even if you can, it's good to have them talk to maybe academic qualities about how you were a good writer, or you were able to work on actual paper products. I know this sounds super boring to some veterans, but actual like desk work is something that hopefully they can speak to very positively. And then, of course, character and being a positive contributing member to their class, because it's very hard for you to say that you're you're going to be a great member for their class, but it's much more meaningful when you have a letter of rec writer say, hey, this person really cares for the people around them. Here's objective evidence about when they've done that before. I think that stuff goes a long way to have another person say on your behalf. So some guidance to your letters of rec writers, and even deconflicting guidance. So especially if you're writing, having 2 letters of rec from recommenders in the same unit, try to have them deconflict their stories so they're not being duplicative, because that's just more angles on your statue of, oh, like here's more stories about him being a good guy or her being a great leader or whatever it is. So, yep.
Super helpful. Damn, I wish I had been able to hear this while I was applying. I mean, my application cycle went fine a couple years ago, but this is very illuminating. Hopefully, Damon, what are you thinking?
That's
I mean,
good.
I'm soaking all of this in.
Illuminating.
Yeah.
You got to keep the metaphors consistent.
Yeah,
That's what Jasper said to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Damon, I want to pick your brain. Like you're in the kind of in the middle of all this right now. You're getting your shit ready to go. So what's going on in your brain?
No, I'm just kind of soaking it all in. I think I'm going to be using a lot of this podcast and playing it back and writing down a bunch of notes as I'm going through my application. So thank you for everything that you said. I think you're super insightful and have a lot of good advice. And yeah, I think you sell service to schools just by being here on the podcast, you know?
Yeah. That's the goal. And, ultimately this is going to be, we're all in the business of increasing access to legal education, right? And so the Demon, as we establish a bigger vet presence, and service to school has been doing the Lord's work for years and years now. We all kind of want the same outcome, which is we want more people to have more access and have more opportunity. So that's kind of the story there. And I think we can both agree that anybody who listens to this, if you're going to get one big takeaway, and I think it's gonna influence a lot of people's application. Jasper, if you don't mind, I kind of want to pivot because I think we've been grilling you and you've been giving us your like mentor advice, but I kind of want to hear from Jasper, the law student, a little bit, because it's not often that we have a Stanford JD MBA with us, right? So I do kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. Something I hear a lot from students is it feels like the application process is futile or useless because people feel a disconnect between preparing for the LSAT or even working on their writing and preparing all the stuff you just mentioned in detail. They feel a disconnect between that work and whether or not they're going to be successful in law school. Could you speak a little bit to any connections you see, the work that you did when to go into the application process and make your application better? Do you think that that's impacted your law school experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize like whatever goal is at hand, and when you're in the admissions process, the goal is to be admitted to law school, and then your goal can then pivot to prepare to law school. And so they may be related, but they're not, necessarily parallel goals. But I mean, there certainly are pieces that overlap. So, for example, just getting better at writing is useful, right? So reading books on reading actually, genuinely reading books is another good way. And so, yeah, I mean, those are some places that have some overlap. I mean, reading comprehension has got to be one of, from the LSAT, has got to be one of the most relevant examples to law school, because you'll often be reading fairly frustrating old texts, and so you're already sort of preparing for that by studying. But one of the things that once you've completed the admissions, once you've submitted and you want to then transition your brain to the new goal of preparing for law school. Again, I wouldn't do this until you've accomplished the first mission of finishing your applications. But once you transition your brain, it's really, really, really important to recognize that your law school grades in almost every class are going to be consisting of a single evolution, which is your one exam, anywhere from a 3, 4 to 8 hour exam. And, a mistake I made, despite being warned against it, is essentially over preparing for class and under preparing for the exam. And that's very easy to do because people want to, they want to make sure they understand what's going on in class. They think that preparing for class is the same as preparing for the exam. Like, if I read this case very closely, not only will I know it for class tomorrow, but I also need to know it closely for the exam. And while that is in some case true, it's not exactly the same as preparing for the exam. So, for example, Some of the best students I know at Stanford who get some of the best grades, they're done with their whole quarter's worth. We do a quarter system, but done with their whole quarter's worth of reading a week, 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks before the reading period, and they're spending genuine time even during like when we normally have classes. They're spending time preparing for the exam, so taking more practice exams, building their outlines, refining their outlines, etc. So maybe one of the biggest things if you're trying to get good grades in law school, which I'm probably not the best person to speak to since I'm kind of working on business stuff and the grades aren't the the center of my bullseye, but it's just focus on what makes you have the best exam, and that's often having a very thorough outline and a very thorough knowledge of your outline, and having taken a bunch of practice tests and not necessarily being able to answer every cold call, even if you look embarrassed for a day or two.
And I mean, come on, if you're a vet, you've been embarrassed, right? You've been chewed out by somebody that outranks you by a mile, and you look stupid. That's okay.
Yeah,
we live to see another day.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I mean, like, I think veterans are resilient. We are willing to work hard, but you kind of mentioned it's not all about putting your head down and working hard. You also have to work smart, right? Make sure you're preparing for the right thing. Mm-hmm. Are there other skills that you draw on in your law school or business school experience that you're drawing on from your military experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things that vets might be better at handling than the normal student is just recognizing that whatever you think is chaos here just doesn't really matter. Like there's a lot of maybe anxiety that goes along, some of these schools and grades and trying to get your next job. But vets tend to be way less anxious, and which also helps with things like interviews and the rest of it. So that might be one consistent through line. But
yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that might be we kind of just operate at a higher baseline of stress. So right. So like any fluctuations to that stress kind of just they roll off our back like water off a duck's back. But yeah.
All right, so talk about your transition a little bit from the military into the classroom.
Okay, so I'll say there's like two things to talk about here. The first might be the social aspect, and the second might be the professional aspect. So from like a social aspect, one of the things, most vets come in with a number of years of experience. Like I was 8 years experience, I'm 31 years old, and at least at Stanford, I think the average age of our class is about 24 and a half. Like 2 years work experience. And so there's not just a bunch of years difference. There's like there's a generational divide. Like the type of pants I wear are different than the type of pants the new Gen Z students are wearing, and the way we speak and everything. So I think for veterans, we tend to maybe group around maybe the other veterans in the Vets Club, maybe some of the older students, but that's not to discount what are truly some of the most bright individuals in the country who at 24 years old are able to get into the same school you did. You took 10 years to get into or whatever. So I've been really genuinely impressed with the caliber of students that I've been able to speak to. And so you really just there is a balance about the types of things you talk about and who you find as friends. And I think for me, at least, it tended to be some of the more the older, more experienced students. But I wouldn't come in with a sense of mightier than thou, which is sometimes easy to have, just because you may have seen some things, and other people may have just been at a desk job for 2 years or something to that effect. Some of these kids are so absolutely bright, and many have stories that you just would not expect at first glance, and are deeply impressive. So anyway, yeah, again, socially, you'll find your path, and there's often hundreds of students in these classes that you'll be able to find your couple close ones. And then professionally, this is, I think, maybe a more interesting thing to talk about. There's a lot of vets and high performing vets who have done really well their entire careers and are smart enough to apply to law school and really have a lot going for them in life, and were successful in the military. But then the transition ends up being more difficult for them than they expect. And speaking for me, right? Like for my entire military career, I just had to be the fastest train on the track, right? And that's what success meant. Is like there's a codified definition of what success means for in aviation, like in the cockpit. Whatever golden path would be towards command, if that was something you were going to do and stay in. You know what to do, just have to be the best at it. One of the big transitions when you're leaving the military is not being the fastest train on the track, but deciding which track that you want to be on. And that is a whole different skill, right? Like you can be a 100-hour-a-week grinder that is able to just pump out really high quality material for hours on end. But that's not the same as making sure that that level of effort is aimed in the right direction. And that is a different skill. So this is something that's really, really interesting to struggle with. And I spent my whole first year in law school figuring out like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Because, there's options in the legal field from, being a litigator to being transactional. But even in each of those, there's several subfields. And then you can also discuss if you want to be, a private litigator or like a public sector litigator. Do you want to have like a specific niche? I want to do, I don't know, like healthcare litigation or something, or I want to work at a certain, even if you pick a niche and you know exactly what you want to do, there might be then 12 firms that you want to pick from, and like what culture do I want to be a part of? And then you can also question, do I even want to do law? Or do I want to do JD Advantage jobs? Do I want to go into business? Et cetera, et cetera. And so these are, even for the highest performing, be it veterans or maybe students at large, the choosing what you want to be when you grow up is a different skill than just performing well. And that's something that can be a struggle as we transition after having like a clear sense of identity for a decade. My antidote to that is really just trying out as many things and talking to as many people as you can, and seeing what sticks and what resonates. And for me, so I don't want to stray too far from the law, but part of the reason that I'm now a JD MBA and maybe leaning more into business was, for me, my personal goals, my personal visions of my future. I thought the second most aspirational people I met were the super wizard smart, kids who were going to become Supreme Court clerks. Like they knew cases, they could reference cases they learned a year ago in like a niche class, and it was perfectly on point, and it was like a brilliant insight that metaphor that we didn't understand, etc. Like these kids were really, really impressive, and they were like the second most aspirational for me, and then the first most aspirational were for me like I'm in Silicon Valley, were the founders who are really taking like extremely high agency risks with their life. And so I don't know if that'll work out for me, but that's part of the reason I kind of transitioned, and it was useful to spend a year finding. You could use the same heuristic, right? Which is like, who do I want to be around, or who do I find aspirational? And that could be in law or outside of it.
I'm so glad we got to the JD MBA thing, because there would have been so many veterans listening to this podcast so mad at us for going, you got a freaking Stanford JD MBA, and all you asked him were dumb questions about law school, and you didn't even talk about the MBA part. So I'm super glad you touched a little bit on your vision for why the joint degree might have been a good fit for you. I think in the same conversation, we should touch on Knight Hennessy. I think that's part of the conversation, and that might illuminate something for somebody out there. Would you mind talking a little bit about Knight Hennessy and how that might have played into your ability maybe to do this joint degree program?
Sure. So, well, I'll say as a more general advice, so Knight Hennessy is the program I'm part of at Stanford, but it's worth noting that there's a variety of scholarships across the many schools that you could apply to, from Knight Hennessy at Stanford. If you have a need-based situation, there's the Hearst Horizon Scholarship at Yale. There's the Black Family Fellows at Harvard. There's a couple of scholarships that may just be offered to you based off of your application, like the Rubenstein at Chicago. For military specifically, they should know about the Bass Scholars Program at Vanderbilt. So there's scholarships all over the place. There's also non-school affiliated ones like Tillman, which veterans should consider. But for Knight Hennessy specifically, are kind of, I won't speak on behalf of the organization, but the way it tends to be marketed as a multidisciplinary, multicultural scholarship. It's fully funded, so we have students from across the world. I think nearly 50% of our students are international. And they cover all 7 schools at Stanford. So, we have engineers, MBAs, law students, doctors, etc. So, yeah, I mean that's a little bit about what Knight Hennessy is. It's a fairly selective program, but it does offer full funding, right? So you'll get your 3 years at law school funded by Knight Hennessy, which for veterans means you can preserve your 9/11 GI Bill, which may be especially valuable for veterans looking to transfer it to their families if they're able to do so or already have. Or it can also mean that you are able to pull your military housing allowance, your MHA, at the same time as pulling a Knight Hennessy stipend, allowing you just a little bit more fiscal stability as you make the transition. And that's especially relevant for veterans who tend to often have families in a way that maybe some other students don't have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And man, I mean, the benefit conversation is a bigger one, and it's not going to be one that we can fit into this. But Service to School does a really good job of, if you guys have any questions, if you're listening and you have any questions about stuff like this, scholarships, ed benefits, anything, they're a great resource. We're also, Damon and I are a good resource if you want to reach out to us. That tends to be, like you just mentioned, Jasper, to me, that's like a personalized thing. Sure. It depends on a lot of things. Do you have a family? Where do you want to live? What's your situation? What's your financial situation? So those are kinds of longer, more personalized conversations. I think we would do a disservice to kind of give blanket advice, but I think we've done what we can. Just even knowing, hey, there's scholarships like this out there. There's ways to make this education really, really affordable or even completely covered. And it's for people, it's for people like us. So thank you for explaining that a little bit. I mean, that's kind of all I got. Damon, do you have anything else to ask Jasper? We've kept him so long already.
No, I just wanted to say I appreciated you being here today, man. You're definitely a wealth of knowledge, and it's a pleasure to meet you and have you on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun for me because I used LSAT Demon for close to a year or so, 6+ months. And so it's kind of fun. I listened to the podcast regularly when that was the other thing. This is all a no-fail mission for me. So I listened to like every admissions podcast that ever, existed, to include all the LSAT Demon ones. So it's kind of fun to come full circle. Yeah.
And here you are giving back to the pod, give back to the pod that fed you. But that's, I mean, and dude, I just to echo what Damon said, can't thank you enough for giving us your time. You've been so generous with your advice and your mentorship. And you continue to be generous with your time and your mentorship. You're going to continue to take on more mentees as a mentor at Service to School. Hopefully this isn't the last time we can wrangle you, but it sounds like you're going to get real busy founding the next big thing out in Silicon Valley.
Well, I hope. Who knows? I can't. These are high risk endeavors, but I mean, the last thing I'll say is just to all the veterans listening, right? Let's start getting your diagnostic score. Start studying for the LSAT. Get that to Service to School and with a draft essay, and we'll see where we can pair you and how we can help you get into hopefully your dream schools. Yeah.
And just to clarify, that's service, the number 2 schools.org, right?
Service, numeral 2 school.org. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, or throw that into Google. It'll come up. It's the only thing like it. Yeah, and to help, we'll put the link on our site too. So if you guys struggle to find it, we'll help you out there. But yeah, check out Service to School, the number 2, service2school.org. And I mean, yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Jasper. Thanks, Damon, for taking the time, folks. Everybody listening, this has been the Demon Daily Podcast. We have other podcasts. We have Thinking LSAT too. So check out the other socials. Check out all the podcast stuff. We're going to do stuff like this a bunch. And hopefully this partnership turns into us actually hosting workshops with Service to School. So we might, if you create a Demon account, you can stay up to date with any workshops we host alongside our new partner, Service to School. Those workshops are going to be a better space maybe for those conversations, those longer conversations about benefits, longer, more personalized conversations about where you are at, you as an applicant are at, and what we can do to help you. But we're here for you guys. We're here to be a resource to the veteran community. And that's that. Yeah. Again, we're not selling anything. We're here to help, and we want to increase access to legal education. And it sounds like we're taking some steps to do that today. So I would say go create a Demon account, go create a Service to School account. Those are the things you can do right now to help. Like Jasper said, start being a faster train on whatever track you're on, and start thinking about what track you want to be on in the future. But in the meantime, folks, keep listening, and you can email daily@lsatdemon.com if you'd like to ask us a question, recommend a guest. If you have a question for Jasper, please ask us, and we'll send it to him. We'll get you an answer. If you want to share LSAT stuff, law school admissions news, you can email, again, daily@lsatdemon.com. But until then, thanks for listening.